Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, welcome, Lisa. Waits for no one. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for being on my first interview of Quick and Delish Life Interviews. I thought you are the perfect person to interview, especially for the first one, because you have a nutrition background. You're a clinical nutritionist, and in Canada, Calgary specifically, and you're super passionate about health. You're a lifestyle coach, and you're also a reverend singer-songwriter, and you wear a lot of hats. So balancing having a family as well as following through with your passions, and like sounds like you're somebody that likes to pick up lots of nuggets of knowledge along the way and give back to your community. So there's a lot there. And so I just am so grateful for you to share your time and your wisdom with me today and folks who are listening today about how you've, what I'd really like to share, the reason, the purpose behind these interviews is to share wisdom and thoughts about how to stay focused on health when we have a big life to live. And honestly, if I were to meet you and reading your bio, you know, you're reverend, you're well educated, you have multiple higher education degrees, and I may be intimidated by meeting you because of all of your big life stuff. And so I really would love to hear how you like break down your day and like how you really use health as a foundation to live an awesome life.
Well, thank you. That's a lot of questions in one question, Alicia. I am
one at a
delighted
time.
to
One
be
at a
here.
time.
One at a time. Let's start with, no matter how big or small someone's life is, everybody's got to eat, right? And so the one constant in all of the different roles that I've had and all the different ways that I've lived so far is that I've been a wife for almost 27 years now and a mother for 21 of those years. And so how we organize our time at home, how we manage the demands of having medical diagnoses and dealing with specialty diets and all of those sorts of things have really helped us hone down to what is important for us as a family, what our priorities are going to be, and how we're going to make it work. And so that changes over time. You know, when the kids were really little, it was easy enough to put some Cheerios in a baggie and a little bit of cut up fruit, and off we'd go to whoever had a doctor's appointment or off to the playground or whatever. As they get older, it changes, right? So there are seasons in family life. And I'd like to encourage your listeners and viewers that that's okay to embrace whatever season you're in and find the strategies that work for you as a family in each season. So right now our kids are either teens, or we have one who is 21, our oldest, and our daughter is 19 and our youngest son is 16. So we're in the busy activities, you know, 4 of us drive, there are 5 of us in the family and 2 vehicles, and probably the car schedule is the most complicated schedule that we have. But mealtime is certainly something we've prioritized, and that continues to be a really important focal point. So if the kitchen is the heart of the home, then, you know, the kitchen table is the heart of the kitchen, the heart of family life. And so we make sure that we're eating together 7 nights a week. 6 of those nights at a minimum would be at our table together.
Oh, that's wonderful. So how, like, break down the details of that. Like, how do you make it so that the kids aren't like, oh man, do we have to? How did you instill that this is just what we do?
I think it started from the beginning, but if your listeners aren't at the beginning, that's okay. You just start where you are, right? But for us, it was, we've eaten together always. So it just becomes the expectation that they grow up with. And we made sure the kids were involved from the earliest point. So, you know, when they were just toddlers, they could, as soon as they could reach the table, then somebody was helping mom set the table, or somebody was helping dad stir the soup, or like, we just made sure they were involved in the meal prep. Like even today, they still help with, you know, I'm the person buying the groceries, I'm the person thinking about the family menus, but they contribute to what they would like to eat or what they would like to make. We have a chore chart so that each of the kids cook 1 night a week during the weekdays. And so we have a basic schedule for that that helps sort of orient our planning. But when I bring the groceries home, they help me unload them. They'll help me prep them. We do a fair bit of prep on the weekend. So that might be the time that we would like peel 5 pounds of carrots and cut them up and have them ready for the week, or make our little veggie bags, or make sure that the snack cupboard is full of healthy choices, hard boil a dozen eggs, whatever we're going to do to set up the week for success. Because there's nothing worse than a hangry teen that is reaching for junk, right?
Absolutely. Anybody that's hungry got to watch out, because the monster's in charge. Usually we all have
That's
an inner
right.
monster.
Yeah. And it's not an all or nothing. I get that with coaching clients sometimes, especially in January, where they're like, oh, this is going to be the year that I'm going to be totally healthy. And you know how that lasts, right? Like usually a couple of weeks. If it's willpower alone, you're really setting yourself up for failure. And so what I have tried to instill in our family practices is just small habits, small steps. And that's the same thing that I do with coaching clients. So if they're wanting to be healthier about their nutritional choices, maybe we're swapping out one junky food for a healthier alternative, just one. Or maybe we're cutting out one serving of cola and replacing it with water, or making one change about how much they're moving their body in a day, right? So small things that you can then immediately have success with and feel good about, and building on those positives has made a big difference. And that's, just goes along with the human psychology, right? If something is impossibly difficult, we're not going to stick with it. Whereas if we have small steps that we can see immediate success, it's like, oh, swapping out that one afternoon cola for a glass of water wasn't so bad. And actually, maybe I can just put a little lemon in that, or maybe, I can drink a hot herbal tea. Or, I mean, we're in Calgary, Alberta. It's pretty cold here. We have a long winter. We're big on warm drinks.
Cheers to that. Yeah, I'm all about hot beverages. And that's so awesome. So yeah, working with folks, that's how I work with my clients, one-on-one, baby steps, or in my group meal planning program, baby steps to change.
Yes.
So instead of being like, oh, I'm going to go from this person to a totally different person in a short period of time, now you can keep that identity. You can own that new identity from the moment you make that decision and work towards that person. But in terms of making all those changes at once, that's not sustainable. And as you know, that's the truth.
That would be like taking a couch potato and asking them to run a marathon the next day, right? It at worst, you're going to, risk their life or their health. At best, they're going to collapse partway through the race with blisters or heat stroke or whatever. Like, it's just not going to work out. So if we look at it as the journey toward good health, living in such a way that you're nurturing your health to the best you can, it's like incremental small steps. So, maybe you walk for 5 minutes a day for the first week. And then the next week you try 10 minutes a day. Or you add some weightlifting, or, you park a little further away from the store or your office, or you take the stairs instead of the elevator, like those baby steps, like you're talking about. That's really the way for long-term success. And also it works for any area of life, whether it's trying to improve as a student, or learning a musical skill, or deepening your spiritual life, or making better nutritional choices. It really, in anything that we do, making good habits is something we accomplish over time with small gains, and remembering to reward ourselves, right? I think often we wait for other people. My coaching clients often fall into that mindset of like, they're waiting for me to tell them, give them a report card of whatever we're working on. We can congratulate ourselves. We can give ourselves permission. We don't have to wait for the gatekeepers in whatever industry or business or practice we're in. We can be happy that we picked the carrot sticks instead of the chips. Right?
And enjoy that and be like, yeah, I'm a person that enjoys carrot sticks.
That's
right. And that's an awesome thing. Like one of my clients said just yesterday that he really likes celery. And like he got kind of excited about it, and that he was like, he's in the 70s, and he was like finally, like it sounded like he was like happy to not be ashamed or weird that he liked vegetables.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, those are the wins. That's what I'm talking about. And a lot of times we wait for some sort of magical thing to happen that's like amazing to bring joy to our lives, but really like a hot cup of coffee that hits the spot, or, looking at the sun. We have a full moon. I think it's tonight. And it's like I enjoy the moon, the sun, and the air, and the blue sky, and the
Yeah.
clouds, and the darkness, and the fog, and the rain. And just the little things are really important to enjoy because there is challenge. So this is a great segue for you, Lisa, to share what you do for self-care specifically.
Right. So for me, I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian minister, but in my own life practice, for me, self-care is very much based on the scriptures, both from the Old Testament and Deuteronomy, where the people of God are invited to love God with their whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then Jesus talks about it in the New Testament as well, saying that the greatest commandment is to love God with our whole selves, and then to love our neighbors as ourselves. So for me, it's a principle of loving God, loving my neighbor, loving myself. And then when in the beginning, I would actually draw like a little house, and I would imagine that as 4 rooms of the house. So my physical health, my body, my heart, my mind, and my soul. And I would do something for each of those areas of health every day. And then over my house, I'd have a little walkway. So I'd have like a little stick house and a little walkway, and the walkway was the help I was going to give my neighbor. And so I was oriented upward toward God, outward toward neighbor, and inward toward self. And I work with a lot of clients in terms of spiritual coaching, pastoral care over the years, who have really struggled with loving themselves. Even if we had fabulous parents, we all grew up with some kind of distorted thinking about what self is. And for a lot of religious folks, it's this idea of God as an angry, vengeful God who is like watching for them to screw up, instead of a loving parent that can't wait to embrace and forgive and reorient us, the God that wants good for us. And so often adults will carry these wounds of perfectionism or fearfulness, or will think that self-care is selfish somehow, that they have to give too much of themselves, and then that often ends up in burnout or ill health, right? So for me, being very intentional about what am I going to do to nurture each of those 4 areas of health, and how am I going to share that? How am I going to have an abundance mindset, a hospitality mindset? How am I going to use the gifts I've been given and the opportunities I've had with others, both to mentor and guide, and just to share grace and love with those around me? And how am I going to do that in such a way that I'm modeling it for my children, and making the community a better place, the wider community and the community of faith? And so for me, that little discipline, that little stick house, and I don't have to draw it anymore. It's just very much part of my everyday. And your viewers may not know, I'm actually chronically ill. I've lived with significant diagnoses for a long time. I'm actually on long-term disability from my work as a minister because of it, but I can still put those 4 things into practice every day. And my specialists have actually been amazed how well I've been able to cope and function for as long as I've been able to cope and function. And I would attribute it to that just ironclad self-care practice every single day. And so
Wow.
whether you're a person of faith or you aren't a person of faith, you can still implement those things. So whether you call it prayer or meditation or thoughtfulness, mindfulness, for me, it's an ancient Christian tradition of the mindfulness is awareness examine. It's an ancient faith practice where you just look at, where was God present in your day? Where do you feel like you lived that out? And where do you feel like you missed the mark? And then thanking God for the gift of the day. But you can call that the universe. You can reorient your life into a different direction and still have those principles be meaningful.
Absolutely. And language is really important. So if the word doesn't resonate with you, sometimes I'll go search for a different word that is something that is helpful, to bring the whole house idea to life, because I think it's simple enough. Because if all those areas, and the house is health,
Yes.
and if all those areas are not in balance, and it's not going to be perfectly in balance all the time, especially if you're starting with this practice, but I think it's helpful to have a daily practice of, how am I doing? How's my nutrition? How is my movement? How is, have I given to anybody? Like, does anybody need my help? Because oftentimes when we give to others, then that fills our cup and then fills like the gap of what we need. And I think it's just a really great practice that you're doing, Lisa. And I hope
Thank
that
you.
anybody considers adopting it into their life.
And don't be judgmental with yourself if you forget a room every now and then, right? Like, it's a practice, and a practice is something that does need to grow and shift, and it should serve you well. So it's not meant to be, oh, one more thing I have to do and fit into my day. It should be a life-giving and simple, right? So even if, the one thing you do for your brain is just to read a couple of pages in a book that's interesting to you, or watch one YouTube video, or learn one thing that's new every day. Like, for me, curiosity is just, I have this insatiable need to learn, and that's just who I am. So, feeding my brain is something that helps distract me from chronic pain, that gives me skills that I enjoy, that benefits my family, that helps me benefit the community. But if you're not an avid reader or learner, it doesn't mean you can't do something good for your brain every day.
Absolutely. There's always something. And I personally find that over the years, I learned health as a foundation growing up as a kid. My mom cooked most of the foods from scratch, and it was easy. And I became, it was hard for me to choose foods in like a cafeteria or a place where like you kind of see the food, but like it was just like large portions, and
Right.
our scoops were taken from large vats of stuff, and I was just like, oh, I don't know, for some reason that just didn't seem very appealing to me. And so
No, it probably felt like prison food. Here's a slop on your plate.
I might, yeah. Like if there's a salad bar available, I'd be the salad bar person. I want to be able to put my food in the container that I'm eating because I want to see it, I want to touch it, I want to feel it, I want to experience it.
Yeah.
And that's how I do life in general. And so I just kind of, it was easy to follow like cooking healthy. And when I went to college the first time, like I only had so much money, and so I focused on like the way that the foods to purchase were the ones that were the most satiating and filling. So I was using like frozen peas and eggs and the most nutrient dense. And I didn't even know anything about nutrition. I just knew that for the cost and the money, I knew these foods were really helpful to have around, making lentil soup and things that my mom made that I knew were inexpensive. And just learning different strategies. Like I remember being at the grocery store with my mom waiting in line, and she would count how much money all the food that was on the conveyor belt added up to. And I was like, it wasn't that she was like, Alicia, this is what you do when you go to the grocery store. She just counted it, and I like picked that up. I was like, oh, okay, that's how, like, I didn't know, it wasn't a process. I didn't think about it. It was just like this subconscious lesson that I picked up. But if you're not paying attention to these things and you're in your own world and you're on your phone or whatever, those lessons are lost. So I'm curious, like, how do you teach these lessons to your kids so they don't feel like you're like pulling them aside, being like, this is an important lesson, kiddos.
Yeah.
And having it so that it's just like, this is what you do in order to be a better person and be an awesome person on this planet at this time right now.
I think it's a lot about, it's sort of one of those principles of education that we're not trying to lecture our kids into good nutrition or into good health or into loving food. It's something that is caught more than taught. It's something we model. And kids are going to know whether mealtime is full of stress and anxiety and worry and demands that you finish your plate, or like kids very quickly will pick up on that emotional atmosphere around the mealtime, but also around meal prep. If mom is like, oh, I don't know what to make for dinner, if dinner feels like a hassle every day, right? Kids are going to pick up on that. Most of all, if you never take the kids to the grocery store, they are not going to learn where food comes from. If you never take them to the garden or, to a farm, if they don't understand sort of the cycle of life, where their food comes from, the importance of healthy soil, all the parts that go into making food. I mean, we're really lucky that my husband's parents are active farmers. They're halfway across the country, so we don't get to take the kids there all the time, but we certainly make an effort to make sure they're there every growing season at least. And we've gardened a long time. And so Like just including the kids would be the thing I would say. So make sure you bring the kids to the grocery store with you. Maybe not every time, but enough that they can see, and talk to them about, that grapes grow on vines, not hang from trees or grow in the ground. Like there are kids right now that don't know that potatoes grow underground or that you have to pull up a carrot from its roots. Like there are just so many gaps in our food knowledge. And that's, I'm sure, it traces how we've industrialized the food supply, and kids just don't understand. And so I think bringing children into the conversation, showing them, if you don't have space for a backyard garden, grow a tomato plant in a pot, on your patio, or have a little kitchen garden, start some sprouts, or grow one cucumber plant. Just get kids connected with growing their food, seeing their food, being exposed to it at the grocery store. And then I remember when the kids were little, and it would have been so much faster to not have them helping me, but that help, even if they're, putting cookie dough everywhere, or like I had to get over my inner perfectionist and just let them have the misshapen cookies or the dough on the floor or make the mess, because they're learning really important foundational attitudes about food. And they need to feel like they belong, right? So if we make space for the kids in the kitchen, we give them chores to do, we involve them in meal prep, we keep a positive attitude ourselves about, making dinner. And it's not that I never model for the kids, like I'm tired, or I'm not feeling well, I don't think I can do a fancy dinner tonight, but also modeling that acceptance of, it's okay to make peace with the bagged salad. There are some pretty good quality salads out there now that you can eat. It's not just iceberg lettuce and nothing else. You can actually buy a nice spinach salad in a bag. If you're short on time, and many of us are, you can still make great nutritional choices and involve your kids in that process. So one of the things I had to do as a young adult who is chronically ill was just make peace with, I'm not going to be making bread from scratch. I'm not going to be, spending hours and hours in the kitchen. Even with my clinical nutrition training, I've got to find ways that I can make this work for our schedule and for my body. And so, a big part of that has been pacing, knowing that, okay, holiday cookies, I cannot stand on my feet in the kitchen for hours on end, making all these things day after day. So I will start and do one day a week, like sort of a half day, and then put a lot of the baking in the freezer. So then it's still ready for Christmas entertaining and hospitality and giving baskets to the neighbors, but I haven't overdone it all in a week to try to get the baking ready for the neighborhood or the family gatherings.
Right. And then
So
you're toast on the holiday, right?
Yeah. So making food work for you, for your viewers to know that, we all have these scripts that we inherit from our family of origin, or that we pick up from our spouse's families, or what we think
culture.
Yeah.
We make assumptions. We're often making assumptions.
And I think especially around holidays, and especially as women, even if our partner shares some of that role, it's the buck still stops with me, right? Like my husband is happy to barbecue. He will do dishes if I ask him to. He will peel potatoes. He will be involved in food prep and cleanup. But I'm still the one that is, making the meal plans, figuring out when we need groceries. If we're out of something, the kids still look accusingly at mom. Like, how did we run out of this thing I wanted? Like, which I think is probably typical for a lot of families. I mean, I don't want to be stereotypical, but I think for a lot of families, certainly for my coaching clients, the moms feel the pressure of nutrition, and are the kids gaining weight, and are they growing well, and am I doing what I need to do? And the moms tend to carry more guilt about that, rightly or wrongly, than the dads.
Right. Yeah, I've seen it myself, but any of the dads that are listening, certainly don't feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
Everybody's different, and thinking about how we can help out and release the pressure of somebody else, and the one that feels the most responsibility or more responsibility can figure out how to communicate and take less. And it's honestly, a lot of it is assessing our energy and figuring out like what we can and can't do, what we want to do, and what's important, and our values. And
absolutely,
it sounds like you're a clinical nutritionist. You want to make cookies around the holidays. That's part of reality. You want to make them, give them as gifts to people. and you might add less sugar than some people. So that's probably a good thing.
White death.
Wanted to point that out.
There are cookies and then there are cookies. Like I don't bake Costco cookies, right?
Right, exactly. Store-bought cookies always have like, they're like, oh, let's have extra sugar.
Yeah.
So prioritizing what you want to do, but in a time frame that works for you so that you're not depleted, and like to not just get depleted, that's not the goal. The goal is to actually have the energy that you want to do to fill the house of you. Yes. With what you want, with love and joy, and you're not going to be top of on top of it every time, but like how can you keep going in a way that's like, oh, okay, this weekend I'm gonna have like, once I encourage my clients to think about how they can have like one weekend that's more like about downtime, and you can have fun and everything, but it's just not like super full of lots of things. Right. And in terms of meal planning, I'm curious of what your system is in terms of meal planning. You mentioned like the grocery shopping, and you do the menu planning and you ask your kids what they want and they help with the prep and everything. But I encourage my clients to do like a heavier meal planning, but not like super heavy, like boot camp kind of meal planning, but like make 2 things twice a month and then freeze the portions the day that you make them so that they're freshest. And if you do that, then you're building your freezer. And basically I empty my freezer once a month and then I like build it up again. So I'm not like doing this like big whole thing. It's just like filling the freezer and then filling the freezer in 2 weeks and then emptying it again. And it makes it, meal planning is one of the many things I do for self-care. And I feel great when I know I have food there because I got a lot of other things to do, right, Lisa?
Absolutely. We keep a big pantry, and we started out doing that because we were living in Northern Ontario and you just never knew when the roads would be accessible or not, or when you'd have power or not. And everybody had a good pantry because you just didn't know when you could get to the grocery store. Just like everybody had 4 different ways to make coffee when the hydro was out, right? Like there were just ways that you planned and prepared because you didn't want to be caught short. But we've found that as one of our key strategies as a household dealing with illness, so that we have pre-prepped meals in the freezer all the time in case I'm hospitalized unexpectedly, or we've got a kid in the hospital and we need super quick meals that are already prepared. So I love that idea that you're sharing. Just make a double batch. Often when I make a pot of chili or a big pot of homemade soup, I'll freeze the other half for a meal so that it's just ready to go. And the kids know they can serve that with, the healthier options for crackers, or we've got frozen bread dough that they can, they know to amend. So it's a little bit healthier. We'll often add some cheese for protein or a little bit of ground flax, or make our own topping, but quick and easy. So for us, we have at the moment, we've got a basic meal plan for the week. So Mondays are our meatless Monday. So I will often make a vegetarian pot of soup of some kind. And the kids always laugh and say, is there a recipe for this, Mom? Because generally it's like, I'm using whatever vegetables are left over in the crisper. And I probably can't make it exactly the same again, but that's part of the fun. Right. Like at this point, I'm really not a recipe person. Often if I follow a recipe, it will turn out poorly compared to when I'm just cooking, throwing things together that I have available. But that's something that has come over time, right? When I was first starting out cooking, just for Jeff and I did very much have recipes that I enjoyed. But for us, Mondays are meatless Monday. So we'll make a pot of soup, and that's my dinner night. And then Tuesday, I help our youngest child cook dinner. That's his night. So that's often sort of a traditional Canadian dinner of some kind of meat or protein source, a starch, and a vegetable. And so he's still learning how to do that, how to prepare different things. So it might be fish, or it might be chicken, or it might be pork. We don't usually eat beef during the week. We'll have that on the weekend once a week for red meat, but I'll help him with that. And then Wednesday, our daughter cooks independently, and she'll do something with rice, some sort of stir fry, again, based on what we've got on hand, and often using a little bit of leftover meat from Tuesday night's dinner.
Nice.
And then Thursday is our oldest son, and he's the pasta guy. So he will make some kind of pasta meal, whether that's sort of a homemade version of hamburger helper or a spaghetti or whatever. He'll make something. And again, like sometimes it's like a tuna helper kind of meal with pasta. I'm the only person that really loves fish in our family, so I'm always looking for ways to incorporate more fish, and tuna in sort of a homemade craft dinner idea is about the closest that the kids enjoy. And so we're not eating as much salmon as I would prefer, but they're eating well. And so that's like, don't let perfectionism or sort of nutritional optimums get in your way. You want to make the healthiest food that your kids will actually eat and enjoy. And so, give up the guilt over that if it's not exactly what you think would be optimal. Right.
Absolutely.
And then Fridays, we that's the one night that if we're not going to eat at the table, it will be Friday night. We will often make homemade pizzas and then watch a movie together. Because usually by Friday night, we're all really tired and crabby. It's not the night to do board games or family togetherness that requires like social skills and interactions. It's the night to just watch a movie, have some pizza and veggies, and wake up on the weekend.
Nice. That's a good way to do it. And like
Yeah.
6 nights a week, you're eating
At
together.
the table. Yep.
And
Yeah.
3 of your 3 kids are responsible for a night. One's in training.
Yep. And then on the weekends, we will often just do things that are a little fussier if we have the energy. So often Saturday, Jeff will barbecue something. We'll still have a sit down meal, and then Sundays we'll often do a roast or something in the crock pot. And we call that sort of our Sunday dinner. So, if you were going to have people over, that would typically be the night that we would do it. It's been a little different because of the pandemic. We're not having people at home the way we normally would. I spent 6 years as a college chaplain, and so we would often have international students that, lived too far from home to go home for holidays. So we would invite them to our house. And so we had this wonderful intercultural kind of experience where, we might have students from Kenya and students from South Korea and like students from everywhere. And we would often try one dish or invite them if they had cooking facilities to bring a dish that was sort of their favorite for a holiday. And then we'd all eat together. So I think hospitality is a big part of values for our family about nutrition and wanting to share with others. And another sort of core value for us would be that idea of gratitude for our food, being grateful that for us, that God has provided that to nourish our bodies, but also just having that attitude of, enough. It's sort of like that opposite of a scarcity mindset. I grew up in poverty. And so that idea of like not having enough, having an empty cupboard, I think when you grow up that way, you have two choices. You can either replicate that generational poverty and those attitudes about food, or you can go in the opposite direction. And so like our kids will tease me that I'm just pathologically incapable of making a potato salad that's smaller than 10 pounds of potatoes, because I just always want everyone to have enough. And like they will laugh, like it's a running family joke now. Nobody ever leaves our table hungry. Like there's always enough for our family, for leftovers or freezer food, and for whoever we might decide to invite home with us that day. But that's intentional on our part, right? We want our kids to see that love of God, love of self, love of neighbor. So,
if you have extra, you can give it to somebody else. You freeze it. It's not going to waste.
Absolutely. Never going to waste. We're really careful about that. Just knowing how much energy it takes from the planet to produce every calorie that we consume, that we're thoughtful and mindful, about the costs of sustaining our human lives, and that we're generous to others in the sustaining of their lives. So, whether it's a sick neighbor or somebody who's lonely, food nourishes our bodies, but it can nourish our hearts and our minds too, right? So just being thoughtful about, is somebody grieving? There's a reason we bring casseroles upon casseroles upon casseroles after the funeral, right? We just instinctively know that we need to nurture people who are grieving, and that's one of the practical ways we can do it.
Absolutely. So and there's and you brought up a great point in terms of growing up in poverty, and then that's like what happened with the Depression, right? Like there was hardcore like poverty, and then not the baby boomers, the great generation, right?
From the Second World War.
They were brought up and they told their kids, the baby boomers, you have to eat everything on your plate, because that was the reaction. Like, we have this food, you must eat it, because we've come from not having. Right. And so a lot of my clients over the years, they've told me that one of the variables that influence their eating habits was the notion of you got to finish your plate.
Yeah.
Because that it doesn't just stay at home growing up. It stayed with them, as an adult. And then when they're at a restaurant, when the meals are large and they're enough for 2 or 3 people, then that's the thought. You have to finish your plate. And
That's
it's hard to separate that from a foundational lesson.
Yeah. And I think that can impact disordered eating, in a lot of directions, even if it's that sense of control, right? Whether it ends up with bulimia or anorexia or overeating or obesity, like all the ways that food can get in our way. And I think it's pretty hard to live on this planet, get to adult life without some negative images and attitudes about food, right? I know for teenage girls, even younger than teenage girls, like that sense of having to look a certain way and all the pressure that goes on that generation because they can't get away from it. I mean, when you and I were growing up, maybe there were teen magazines where girls were supposed to look a certain way, and then eventually MTV. But as a child of the 80s, I could go play and not be like, I was out in the world and not being formed by that constant pressure, where now it's TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all, like, you just cannot escape those messages bombarding our teens all the time. And so I think that positive body message is really important, healthy connections and relationships with food. And again, it goes back to whatever stage of children your viewers have, or the kids in their lives, if they're not parents themselves, just including kids in meal prep, in planning, in enjoying food, having family mealtime as a pleasurable part of the day. So that no matter how rushed we might be coming to the table, that we make that effort. For us, it's saying grace and being together. When the kids were little, we used to ask them to share their rose and their thorn, or their apple and their onion, something that was positive about their day and something that was a challenge about their day. And then we would talk about it. And we, like, when they were little, we would literally go around the table and each take turns sharing about that. So we were modeling, you don't have to have a perfect day, right? You can have challenges in your day and we can talk about them. And that modeled, healthy feelings and processing, all while enjoying a meal together. So I think awesome. Like that time together, spending time around the table and spending time together doing cleanup. One person washes the dishes, one person dries the dishes, one puts them away or empties the dishwasher. Like we sort of have these little mantras or core statements for family life. And I'd encourage your viewers to establish and think about what those things are. For us, it's in a family, everyone helps. And so, that's meant as an encouragement that no one carries the full load of the chores, whether it's cleaning or meal prep or whatever. We all help, right? We're here for each other, but each person has responsibilities to contribute to family life. And that changes over time. Like for me, I'm not able to do the physical things I used to be able to do, but there are still things I can do. We modeled that for our kids as well. And I think that's one core value that has really stood us well as they've grown. Another might be, this is not a restaurant, which is short form for our kids to know that, like, you have 2 choices. You can eat what is served, or you can be hungry till the next meal. Like, sometimes I have clients who will be like cooking 5 different things for 5 different people. And that's just an exhausting way to go.
So how did you figure out that that's not an option? Because a lot of parents out there are doing that.
To me, it just seemed ridiculous. I just wasn't willing. So we never allowed that pattern to be established. Okay. And when, kids were visiting and they were like, oh, I don't eat that, or I don't like that, or whatever, we would just say, well, in our family, we have a no thank you bite. So that was like, you could try something and not like it. And we're not going to make you eat a plate full of liver and onions because we think it's good. Actually, I would never serve that anyway. But
that was just an extreme example.
You can have a no thank you bite, and that's a small serving, and it shows honor to the person who made the meal, that you're at least trying a little bit of it. And then if you don't choose to eat more, that's fine, but we're not making you a separate plate of something. So it's the same thing. Like, I've been eating gluten-free now since 1993, but we don't make a whole separate meal. Right. So, or if there was at one point we were doing an exclusion diet for one of the kids, but we still ate the same meal together. Somebody might have a different crust. Maybe I have a cauliflower crust and they have a wheat crust, but we're still having the same thing. Right. So wherever we could, we ate in common while making reasonable adjustments for food allergies or intolerances, trying to be hospitable, but without turning into this idea of, well, I don't like that texture. I don't like this item, or I'm never eating whatever. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like it's been really helpful to be a clinical nutritionist in your family.
Yeah. I
With
actually
meal planning and dealing with the food sensitivities, and elimination diets and such. And it's just so wise and important to adopt the meal strategy, or like the nutrition plan of the person that is having the challenge, because
Yeah.
that's the most inclusive way and low energy way to do it. Where some people are like, oh, we'll just keep everything the same, and the one person will eat gluten free. Where nowadays it's so easy to eat gluten
Yes.
free.
Yes.
Like 12 years ago was a different story. But now it's just so easy. You like, there's so many foods that are just naturally gluten free. Like chili
Yeah.
has no gluten in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. When I started eating gluten free in 1993, I used to have to call down to the El Pedo factory and have them send me a whole case of bread. And I had a freezer that was just for gluten-free baked goods, because boy, those early efforts at baking gluten-free, like even the dog wouldn't eat it sometimes.
Right,
Like,
totally.
that was an art
Come
form
on.
until I discovered xanthan gum and guar gum and like figured out the blend of flour. Some of those early efforts were pretty bad, especially with bean flour. I do not recommend bean flour for gluten-free baking. But we learned the hard way, right? For some of it. Whereas now it's so easy when I have clients that want, gluten-free recipes or strategies. It's just so much easier now. And for me, like the clinical nutrition training came because Western medicine did such a poor job of, they could do the clinical diagnosis. I've had several surgeries and hospitalizations. They could stabilize me, but they couldn't deal with the foundational inflammation levels, or they couldn't understand why my gut wasn't well, even though, the surgical option looked like it should be well. And I was really on my own search for health and wanting to optimize my health. And so I found the Edison Institute of Nutrition and took both the Bachelor of Applied Science and then went on to the Masters of Applied Science, really to try to heal myself and to try to fill that gap in knowledge where Western medicine leaves off and complementary medicine begins. And so that's been an important part of integrating my own health and then raising my family in that same way. Where if you break your leg or you have a car accident, you really need Western medicine, and they're fabulous at nurturing health. And I'm really thankful for, the blood tests and the ways that they continue to support and nurture my health. I'm not saying don't take your medication or don't participate in Western medicine, not at all. I'm saying that where nutrition is, most doctors, if they're lucky, take one course for one semester in nutrition. Right. And I think there's a reason. I mean, we call it the standard American diet, and we abbreviate that as the SAD diet. And it really is sad for a lot of people. So just for me, looking at health as the quality of the soil in which you're growing your vegetables, how quickly you're able to eat them after they're harvested, like all the ways that you can optimize nutrition has made a big difference for me.
Absolutely. And you said optimize nutrition, but also in a reasonable way that works. That's not like you don't have to grow your own sprouts.
Yeah.
You can if you want. I look forward
Yeah.
to experimenting with growing sprouts at some point too. It's on the list of things to do. But sometimes we make decisions and we make assumptions of like, oh, this is the absolute best way. Sometimes that's too expensive. Sometimes it's too time consuming. And sometimes you don't have an extra freezer to put the extra special thing in, and you can't go drive really far away to get the extra special thing.
Absolutely.
So do what's reasonable. And what I really encourage anybody listening here is, come from a place of power. Like, what can you do for yourself? Like Lisa went to school to become a clinical nutritionist to heal herself. And that was from a place of power and curiosity, right? Because you're like, as you said, there's an unsatiable hunger for knowledge until the end of your day, and same with me until the end of my day. And I think that is just a really powerful way of thinking about health in general.
But it's not for everybody. You don't have to go get 2 degrees to have better nutrition. So just like what you're saying, do it in a reasonable way, because optimal nutrition can't be optimal if it's unattainable, if you can't afford it, if it takes too much time, if it causes stress instead of an attitude of gratitude, then it's not optimal for you, right? So just like what you're saying, take one step, buy a spinach salad instead of an iceberg lettuce salad, drink a little more water, try to get a little more healthy protein. Think about when you're at the grocery store and you're going to buy a frozen meal, just take a look at the nutrition list and keep an eye out for salt and fat and hydrogenated oils and other additives. You know, my rule of thumb that I say to clients is, if you can't understand the ingredients, it probably doesn't belong in your body. Right. So the simplest ingredients that you can get away with. And I mean, there are a lot of choices for us here as Canadians anyway. We've got a grocery store called Superstore, President's Choice, and it's got a lot of what they call their blue menu, which is just healthier choices, often organic, ingredients that you can recognize on the label. But you can make those same choices in any grocery store in any country, pretty much in the Western world, at least, where you can always choose, the healthier option. Once you just start to look at, okay, I want to avoid, hydrogenated oils, or I'm going to take a look at the salt or fat content, or simple things. We don't want to overwhelm people. It's like when they're just starting out with gluten-free diets and reading labels and being discouraged by how much wheat starch is in so many products, right? It's like, let's focus on all the massive amounts of ingredients that have no gluten, just like you said.
Oftentimes it's perspective, right? If you come from a place of, I don't have or a diet where people can't have, I can't have that, I can't have that, I can't have that, forget it. That's not going to be a helpful process. But if you're like, I can have all these healthy foods, and this is how I feel when I eat these foods, that's coming from a space of, enough, having enough,
yes,
or abundance, depending on what strategy is best for you. And I think that is a really helpful strategy. And there's a lot of variables in this life. And what I wanted to do with these Quick and Delish life interviews was interview awesome folks like you who, we're all humans that are imperfect. And that's just the way it is. That's what humans equal imperfect. That's
yep.
It's a fact. And the whole the notion of perfect is we are all perfect, or perfection doesn't exist. Those are the two choices.
Yeah. I'm
so
firmly in the second camp. That would, human life is messy, and that's how we grow, and that's how we learn, and that's how we discover. Right. But one of the things I wanted, and well, as moms, we're constantly cleaning up the mess, right? Like that's just part of our identity by now. But one of the things I wanted to say about when you were talking about not making two separate meals and trying to be inclusive of folks with diagnoses, or it's so important.
Or eating healthy. One person wants to eat healthy and the rest of the family, they need to, come across the bridge, getting folks on board with that idea slowly.
Yes, for sure. I remember the first time I offered communion with gluten-free bread, and somebody who had gluten intolerance had tears running down her face because she'd never been able to eat communion like everybody else. A lot of churches will have sort of like the little gluten-free wafers on the side, and they're usually like stale because you don't remember to serve it all the time, or like the person who's gluten-free has to ask for something different. And so the theological message to her was one of hospitality and inclusion. Everybody ate gluten-free bread, and was it exactly as fluffy as regular bread? Maybe not, but nobody complained. And the person who had the intolerance was included in a beautiful way, right? So just finding ways that we can extrapolate that from not just food allergies, but anything that we're doing as food as an act of hospitality, right? How do we include others? The same way we might, if we know there's a party that an alcoholic is going to be at, then maybe we don't serve wine with dinner because that's just easier for the person who needs to abstain, right? Like any of the decisions that we make as a host, that we're being as hospitable and inclusive to others as we can be. And that's part of the profound beauty of eating, right? Of eating together, of being together as human beings.
Absolutely. And I think that's just such a huge lesson there. It's not necessarily like, it's about participation. Yes. I'm figuring out, I have vision loss. These are just blue light glasses. Hopefully they'll help me, my eyes. I'm legally blind and not correctable. And I've had to figure out how to participate in the world in a way that works for me, just like everybody else on this planet right now. and before us and after us. And I think it's so important to like ask for help,
Yeah.
right? Because you never know. Somebody might say no, but you don't know if you don't
Yeah.
ask.
That's
And
right.
also like the whole like the awkwardness about like alcohol or whatever somebody's not having. It's totally cool. Whoever you are and you're not having whatever the thing is, because that's actually helpful to you to not have.
Right.
No reason to say feel bad about it, and to communicate to folks or not communicate, it doesn't matter. And if somebody asks you like, hey, do you want a glass of wine, you're not having wine, that's just a specific example. Because a lot of times some people for health reasons they might be not having alcohol,
Right.
and some people are figuring out. Oftentimes I encourage my clients to figure out if there's somebody that drinks alcohol but they know it's going to mess with their health or their weight management strategy or journey. Figure out how many times a week or how many servings per week that is cool for you, and then you
Mhm.
just cross that off your list. And
Right.
then if you have 3 glasses of wine, you decided 3 servings is good for you, your maximum. And then you have this fourth opportunity, it's an event or whatever, it's a celebratory thing, whatever, and someone's like, hey, they're going to pour you something, and you're like, no, I no thank you. And you
Right.
have something else because that's what you decided. It was you, you're the boss of you
That's
always.
right. Yeah.
And coming from a place of power, which is not bossy or micromanaging or feeling bad,
Right.
it's your
Exactly.
true self.
And same thing about egg allergies or, any kind of intolerance or people choosing to eat in a certain way, whether that's a particular diet or, avoiding sugar or eating
Because
eating well because they have diabetes or eating well because they're trying to nurture their health. Whatever choice they're making, that's up to them, and we can support and encourage that as hosts.
absolutely. Well,
There's,
this
I
was
guess
just
that's the thing, like it's not one size fits all. What good nutrition means to one person might be something totally different for another, and what good nutrition or what family dinner looks like in one season of life might be totally different than another season of life. Like another one of our core family sort of sayings is manners matter. So if the kids are squabbling, well, that's our shorthand, manners matter, right? But it was as simple as when they were, babies in high chairs, we taught them not to throw food off the edge of their tray. Once they had a fork and a cup, we showed them how to use them correctly and did lots of encouraging when they were polite about it. As teens, it's elbows off the table, whatever we think is important to be gracious to others, to live and eat and be together in a way that's helpful to one another, right? So that family mealtime, family life in general is peaceful and joyful and has the best chance of
the other
launching
time.
them well into the world and being enjoyable at home. I mean, does that mean they never squabble? No. Does it mean we never squabble? No. But we have that manners matter as part of our family code because we're trying to be good to one another, to not harm one another. Love does no harm to its neighbor, right? So I think that's another component of good nutrition or good health, right? Is how we
Absolutely.
treat each other.
How we treat each other at the table and in between meals, out and about, anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you brought up manners and you kind of defined what manners are. It's like not throwing food and keeping food on the plate or whatever. Sometimes if a child is in a high chair, then the food's just all over whatever that tray thing is, and that's appropriate. But like, could you define manners or social awareness related to like eating? Your definition, of course.
Yeah, I guess it's different for each culture, but for us, I think it's really behaving in such a way that we show honor to others, right? And that we give the best opportunity or environment for for love and grace and peace to flourish. So, we don't stab each other with our forks.
That
We
doesn't
can be
sound like
heated. I mean, we also will say, let's keep it civil at the table, right? We can be heated. We can discuss issues. I mean, for us, it's now that the kids are older, it's politics or religion or family life or, political life, what's happening in the country, the pandemic, like current issues, but we'll treat each other well. Manners matter for us is also being able to accept a different point of view, right? One of the things that I see in my work in ministry and in my work as a musician is just this lack of critical thinking in the last 10 years where, if you saw it online, it must be true, and not being able to test out an opponent's point of view, and sort of this character annihilation of, if I disagree with somebody, I've got to swear at them and denigrate them and then block them, like have no relationship. So whether it's across, like, sort of for Americans, the Republican Democrat divide, or in Canada, we have a 3-party, well, actually, I think we're up to 5 main parties now, but it's not quite so oppositional conservative liberal because there are other choices, but it's that same tension of, are you in my tribe or aren't you? Is it, Christian versus atheist? Is it Democrat versus Republican? Is it, healthy nutrition, crunchy granola, healthy nutrition to average, typical, sad diet? Like, all the ways that we oppose one another. I think Manners Matter is this sort of middle ground where we say, we can dialogue, we can have divergent points of view and still love one another and still eat together and still have neighbors of very different viewpoints at our table, right? Whether it's about the pandemic and how we feel about masking or vaccination, or any of the hot button issues, how we feel about Russia and Ukraine, or the potential for nuclear war, like all of the things that we're talking about that could potentially disrupt digestion and make us really anxious. We have this code of being able to discuss those issues in a way that doesn't denigrate our conversation partner, that builds tolerance, that builds acceptance, that builds those critical thinking skills. And I think that's really important, not just for the family unit, but also for society, right? That we can engage with ideas and debate one another without being cruel or shutting down relationship. And I think that's the only way to heal a country, to heal a society, to heal a family, right? To be able to have those discussions.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head precisely. Communication is essential, and we can disagree and we can love each other at the same time. And we can sit at the table and nourish ourselves and have wonderful together time.
Right.
And I think that is just such a helpful way of thinking for health. Because if we feel there's something disruptive in our communication, then that will eventually at least impact our health, because we're not feeling well about the situation.
Right. The other thing we do is there's no cell phones at our table. So, and we started off with that. I mean, for both my husband and I, we were often on call for our work while I was a chaplain, and for him and his work for the government. And we would still put our phones away, for mealtime, turn the messaging on, respond later. We modeled that for the kids. And then as they began to engage in the technology themselves, it's just a given. But we also enforce that for people who are visiting. We'll just say, here's the tray for cell phones. We like to talk to each other while we eat. We don't have phones at the table. Because it's such an addictive pattern. And if you're buried in your phone, you are not talking to people, you are staring at your lap,
Absolutely. You're checked out.
Yeah. So we do that for family dinner. The kids often eat breakfast and lunch independently now because they're off to university or work or, out at school. But even when the adults are eating alone, I really try to encourage clients as well. Don't eat and be on your device, whether that's an iPad or a cell phone. Our Friday night movie night is our one exception where we eat with any kind of media, but, and I don't want to be like legalistic about it. I'm just saying, as a habit, when you're eating, eat mindfully, think about what you're eating, enjoy the textures and colors of your food, enjoy how it tastes and what temperature it is, think about it. People who are struggling with their weight, often if they're eating mindfully, they'll eat less, right? And they'll feel more satisfied. Sometimes we overeat because we gobble. Sometimes we overeat because we're just not paying attention. And so, taking the media away can really make a big difference to how much we're eating in each meal and how satiated we are in between meals. Because lots of us in North America are eating when we're not hungry. Often we're dehydrated, we're actually thirsty, and we're eating instead of drinking. And we're eating because we're upset, stressed, repressing stuff, unhappy with our life. Like, just really looking at why we're eating, especially in between meals when we're not genuinely hungry.
Exactly. I totally agree. So what is my last question or statement? So what is the last thing that you would like for listeners to, or viewers to take away? If they took away one little nugget, you had shared so many golden nuggets, but
Thank you.
to kind of like the big takeaway.
I guess the one big takeaway I would want listeners to know is your health is not just one thing. So draw that little house. If whether you're a person of faith or not, think of that little house of each day doing something good for your body, for your mind, for your heart, for your soul, and then draw that little pathway so you can take it out to help your neighbor as well. Would be one key thing. And the other would be begin where you are, right? It doesn't have to be a whole scale reform. It can be one positive choice that you're going to make, whether it's drinking one more glass of water or going to bed 15 minutes earlier, or make one choice and try to stick with it. And then pat yourself on the back. You did it. You drank that water. You had that one thing. You drew your little house. You started thinking about your health differently, because nutrition is one part of your health and it's important, but it's not the only thing. So when we look at our life and what a thriving, purposeful, meaningful life looks like, I'd really encourage that little house diagram. I think that can really open up an exciting new pathway for a lot of your listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Lisa. It's been a wonderful conversation with you. And I'm so glad we made the time to do this today. And thank you for being the first of my series of interviews for Quick and Delish Life.
It was totally my pleasure, Alicia. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope your viewers will be blessed.
Awesome. Maybe I'll have you back.
That would be great.
Awesome. Thanks so much.